Hello and good evening to all. Is my voice audible to all? Is my voice audible to everybody? Can you hear me all? Kelvin, Lakshmi, Sabhit, Farooq, Dhijesh. Can you all hear me? Yes, good evening to everybody. Can you all hear me? Okay. So our today's class is on entrepreneurship development. So I think most of you are aware of this term entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is something who has the power of taking initiative and running the business on its own. So that is called as an entrepreneur who is a self-starter. So let us see some of the definitions given for the entrepreneurship as per the PDF file. The word entrepreneur has come from the France word entreprendre, which means to undertake, to pursue opportunities, to fulfill needs and wants through innovation, to undertake business. That means a person who can lead from the front. In the year 1725, the word entrepreneur was first brought into economics by a social scientist named Richard Cantillon. The expert who invented the theory of entrepreneurship was David M.C. Cillian in 1961. There was various definition of entrepreneur. According to America Heritage Dictionary, entrepreneur is a person who organizes, operates and assumes the risk for business venture. The Dictionary of Social Science defined the entrepreneur from functional viewpoint. According to it, entrepreneur is a person who exercises the function initiating, coordinating, controlling or institute major changes in a business enterprise, bearing those risks of operation which arise from the dynamic nature of society and imperfect knowledge of the future which can cast through transfer calculation or elimination. So entrepreneur as the individual who bears the risk of operating a business in the face of uncertainty about future condition and who is rewarded accordingly by his profit or losses. So that is the definition of the entrepreneur. So it's better to play some of the videos on entrepreneurship. That will, I think, more helpful for you in understanding. Okay, so I'm playing a video for you for entrepreneurship. That will give you a more clear picture.
Okay, so we're going to start the lectures. This is week 1, and we are starting lecture 1, part 1. So today I'm going to cover definitions, and we're going to talk about what entrepreneurship is. Okay, so entrepreneurship, other than it being a really long, really hard to spell word, which took me several semesters to get into the swing of how to spell it on the board, there are millions of definitions that people have been studying and learning about entrepreneurship since the early 1900s. But in a nutshell, what entrepreneurship is starting a business. I mean, that's basically what it is. And it's starting a business from scratch. So everything from getting the idea, generating the idea, to pursuing the idea, to trying to figure out the resources that you need, to acquiring, getting the resources, to building a team, pulling in valuable team members that are important for the venture itself, to launching, prototyping, then launching the actual business itself, to growing the venture, and then to exiting at some point, usually, or whatever your strategy is. So managing and growing the business is something that we will discuss later on in the semester, and right now we're going to be focused on the startup, the early beginning stages. So what is entrepreneurship? Definitions go back into the 1911s. Schumpeter was one of the first to actually study entrepreneurship. He defined it as innovation, creativity, and that's it. They didn't really explore too heavily into the term itself. Then they looked further into the 20s and 30s at entrepreneurship would be buying and selling shares, stocks, much like what you would do on the stock market. And that became something that was very constricted because not everybody is launching their business public. So then researchers went and looked further, and they started looking at entrepreneurship as, well, you have to be a founder of the business in order to be an entrepreneur. Well, the Ray Krocs of the world threw that right out of the door because Ray Kroc didn't actually invent McDonald's, but he franchised it. So researchers were yet again stumped. Okay, so they were trying to wrap their head around what does it mean to be an entrepreneur. And so then they started to look at physiological traits, characteristics, things like that. And Kent was one of the first researchers to look at this to try to find commonalities that existed among entrepreneurs to help define who and what they were. So there were some commonalities that he found in his research. So most entrepreneurs are independent. They have a need for achievement. They tend to have a perceived locus of control, meaning that they feel like they can control their destiny to some extent. Some entrepreneurs tend to have a thread of childhood deprivation, or they came from a socioeconomic background that had a lot of hardship. I can think of many entrepreneurs that I know that have become successful, and one of the drivers for them was that they literally were starving. Unfortunately, Kent realized through a lot of the commonalities and research that he had done over the years that some entrepreneurs had some of these characteristics and traits, others didn't. So it was just too inconclusive to basically say that this is what someone who's an entrepreneur looks like or is. Okay, so it was very conflicting, and I don't want to say that they threw it out, but they sort of moved on to other things. Okay, so there's two places to go, actually three that I can think of off the top of my head if you want to really research entrepreneurship that have institutions that are well regarded. Kauffman Foundation is out of Kansas. It's one of the strongest. It's one of the best. They have up and coming research all the time. Stanford is probably one of my next favorite picks to go and research and look at, and Harvard. So our textbook is a custom Harvard case-based book, which we've handpicked the cases from Harvard, which you will be reading in the next few weeks. So when I look at some of the definitions, the most recent definitions that we tend to use in the field is Kauffman Foundation's definition and Harvard. So I'm going to start with Kauffman. Kauffman Foundation basically looks at entrepreneurship in two ways. One, it's either replicative, or it's blue ocean. So replicative, what I mean by that is a person will go out in the world and they'll look at things that have already been done. So a bar, a microbrew, great example. And they go down to Lodo and they see there's a lot of bars, and they figure out that they might want to start one. And it seems to be working, people are making money, and so they basically try to replicate it. Oftentimes, those that are successful replicating have to put some kind of spin on it. So if you look at Uber, it's a company that I'm an angel investor, and it's a company that I have done some investing with in the early years. Uber is a company that started out actually in several large cities and has really gained a lot of recognition and a lot of negative media over the past couple of months and years. But Uber is, in a nutshell, glorified taxi cab sharing and car sharing. And what the owners found was when they were in Boston and they were in New York and some of the major cities like Chicago, they couldn't hail a cab. And so they were frustrated, and they thought, well, why can't we fix this problem? There's a lot of car companies or drivers that have to wait around while their executives are in meetings. So they could pick up, basically contract out work. And so what they thought was, well, we're going to solve the problem to allow people who need a car, they don't want to pay cash, and give them a way to get transported. And so they created an app basically online. You fill out information about yourself, and you can, in a nutshell, hail a driver who will pick up work if they're in the local area. So you would get on the app and you would tell the location of where you're at, and then Uber would blast out to their network people who are hanging around and don't have a lot of work while they're waiting for executives, or a taxi cab that their idea was a taxi cab that wasn't in use, but that got nixed because of the union problems. Anyway, so what they did was they started the app, and the idea is, I would be on, let's say, 45th and Lexington, and I needed a driver, and I would send my location, and they would text me saying they'd be there in 5 minutes. They would pick me up, give me a bottle of water, drive me to where I needed to go. I would get out of the car, wave to the driver, and I would leave. No money would exchange hands. And then what would happen is they would charge the credit card. I would get a bill, right? Solved a problem. It was easy. It was useful. And that disrupted the system, because now all of a sudden the unions, the cabs, were struggling to compete with Uber, who was gaining traction. And there's a whole other discussion as to the arguments and things that have had to happen, and litigation that's gone into place, and regulations to try to allow Uber to compete in the space. But the point is you can look at something that is being done and try to put a spin on it to make it better and unique, or you can do something that's never been done before. So replicating, imitating something, or blue ocean, which is the second piece of Kaufman's definition, where you go out and you find ocean that is untouched, that's quiet water, that's beautiful, brilliant blue, and you do something totally radical. So the smartphones would be a great example. The internet, when it first came out in 1994-95, is revolutionary. Usually the blue ocean is something that cost a ton of money, electronic ink, which is what we would use on Kindle. Okay, and it takes a lot of time, energy, lots of funding. Typically a large company like a venture capitalist would fund it, and it will radically change an industry. So when you find blue ocean, you start to create something that's exploding growth. Guess what happens? Replication comes in, right? Because all of a sudden people realize, oh man, there's a lot of money to be found. These people are killing it. And so now we're going to do something similar to them with a spin. And so then again, you go back now to replicating, right? So that's the Kauffman Foundation's definition, repetitive and or blue ocean. Now, the definition that I tend to use in class is based on the Harvard definition. There was a professor called Howard Stevenson. He's still at Harvard. He's a faculty member. He is known as a godfather of entrepreneurship. He was one of the first researchers to research entrepreneurship. And he came up with the definition which we will use in class and you will memorize. And it is the pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources you currently control. Okay, so there's a few parts to the definition. The pursuit. So what does that mean? Get an idea, right? So let's say that you were walking on the beach and you saw that this is actually what happened to me. Several years ago, we were walking on the beach and I noticed, it was coming out of the surf, and I noticed that a lot of the fathers that were in the resort areas were wearing rash guards, which are basically surfing shirts, and long board shorts. And the women didn't have, at that time, heavy rash guards, and they were basically in bikinis and or one pieces. They were more exposed, is my point. And so I turned to my husband and I said, I wonder if they're going to create Spanx for men. And I mean, we got a really good laugh out of this, right? Lo and behold, 6 months later, Spanx for Men comes out, hits Europe, and is killing Europe. The sales are unbelievable. And now if you get on to Spanx, you'll see like a whole line for men to try to help men pull in their guts so that when they're walking around and they're dressed up, that they basically look, in a nutshell, 10 pounds thinner. So the idea is that you might come up with an idea, but it's not enough just to get the idea. You have to actually engage yourself and pursue it. So literally run after it and understand that there is a very short window of opportunity to capitalize on it, right? So that's the first part of the definition. The second part is the opportunity itself. So again, you can create pioneering, revolutionary products. You can create repetitive products that have been done before, that maybe you put a little spin on it. You can create the same products but try to find new customers for those products. So if you look at Vail & Associates, a good example, right? They're known for skiing and to some extent some boarding. What they were finding is that their clientele was starting to dip in the younger generations. And so I was teaching a class at CU Boulder, and we had a group of students that we were trying to get to help work with Vail to try to figure out how to pick up sales with the college age groups. And what we found was that Vail's really expensive. It's a little further drive. There wasn't as much of a nightlife there. They didn't have as good of a board park. And the cost in and of itself was something that sort of kept students out. And was very highly international and very family-oriented, which tended to not draw a huge college crowd. And so Vail was trying to figure out a way to target all of their existing products towards the younger generation, towards the youth, and not only college age, but even my children's age. And so they're trying to add in the Xterra games. They're adding in all these different games to try to draw the youth towards Vail, so that now it's becoming, in the hope for them, that it would become something that the students would want to go and spend time during their free time. And then when they have children, guess where they're going to think they're going to go, right? So that's another way that you can look at opportunity, right? And one of the final ways to look at opportunity is creating a cheaper, better version of something that's already out there, right? Which a lot of companies try to do. Some are successful, some are not so successful. Okay, so that's the opportunity piece of the definition. All right, and the final piece is beyond the resource control. So pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources you currently control. So beyond the resources you currently control, meaning you have certain resources that are probably not going to be enough to launch. Money would be the first thing I could think of off the top of my head, and people, right? One of the things that we teach in entrepreneurship is never go at it alone. So you don't want to be a sole founder. You want to have 2 to 4 founders or co-founders is a good mix, because it prevents you from having tunnel vision. You have more funding opportunities, better resources, which all help, especially when you need to delegate and grow and look at certain skill sets. Okay, so mobilizing more resources than what you personally have is something that is vital to the success of a venture. Okay, so that is the most important definition to memorize. Okay, so there's a couple of other things I'm going to talk to you about, which would be lifestyle entrepreneurs and high growth entrepreneurs and necessity entrepreneurs and serial entrepreneurs. So these are all different types of individuals that will go into businesses for various reasons. Okay, so a lifestyle entrepreneur is more of like a mom and pop shop. It is somebody who wants to create a business because they just want to sustain their lifestyle. They're not interested in being super rich. They just want to make a living doing what they love and supporting their family. Okay, that is very different from a high growth venture entrepreneur. Okay, high growth venture is like Bill Gates. It's like Steve Jobs, someone who wanted to dominate the industry. They went in full speed ahead with no stopping. And their whole goal was to kill and squish competition. Okay, so they're known for disrupting industries. They're known for exploding growth. And they're known for helping the economy regardless of what's happening. So you could be in a really bad depression or even a recession, and these high-growth entrepreneurs will come in, create something that's so disruptive that they'll dump money in the economy. Okay, Rockefeller would be a great example. Vanderbilt, great example. Carnegie, J.P. Morgan are all entrepreneurs who disrupted the industries and basically made over $1 trillion in today's day and bailed out our government several times. So those are examples of high-growth entrepreneurs. Okay, so necessity entrepreneurs, these are entrepreneurs that we're seeing more and more often. And this is especially since the recession of 2008. Necessity entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs who go and they try to find a job someplace and they can't. And they need money to live and there's no opportunities, and so sort of out of force, necessity out of need, they go and start a business. Some are successful, some are not. And we're seeing more and more necessity entrepreneurship across the board globally, especially like in Africa, but in the US also. Our necessity entrepreneurship jumped from like 3% to upwards towards 20% over the past couple of years because of the economic downturns. All right, social entrepreneurs. This is something that I'm learning more about because of my kids' company. These are people who they desire to create a business that will help solve some of life's most vexing problems. So it could be anything from hunger to poverty to illiteracy to the water shortage crisis, things like that, energy issues that we might have, right? So they're seeking innovative solutions to solve social problems, okay? And then the final definition we're going to talk about today is a serial entrepreneur, right? Which I guess is me. Usually you'll see a serial entrepreneur as someone who, I guess, kind of gets bored often. They tend to not stick to things long term, like 20, 30 years. We tend to start businesses, and then we either exit out at some point, or we have an exit strategy, or we get bored and something new comes along. You will tend to see a serial entrepreneur own multiple companies. So 2+, 4+, and it's sort of a repeated pattern. Some are successful, some fail. Most serial entrepreneurs are not worried about failure to some extent. They just like the startup culture, and they like the speed and the innovation side of it. And once it starts to grow and the sales start to increase, the culture changes in the company, and they start looking for a way out to do something, again, new, right? So that is the definitions for the class that I want you to remember and learn, and that you will be tested over, and in a nutshell give us the starting point or the foundations of what we're going to talk about from here to come. Okay? Often. They tend to not stick to things long term, like 20, 30 years. We tend to start businesses, and then we either exit out at some point, or we have an exit strategy, or we get bored and something new comes along. You will tend to see a serial entrepreneur own multiple companies. So 2+, 4+, and it's sort of a repeated pattern. Some are successful, some fail. Most serial entrepreneurs are not worried about failure to some extent. They just like the startup culture, and they like the speed and the innovation side of it. And once it starts to grow and the sales start to increase, the culture changes in the company, and they start looking for a way out to do something, again, new, right? So that is the definitions for the class that I want you to remember and learn, and that you will be tested over, and in a nutshell give us the starting point or the foundations of what we're going to talk about from here to come. Okay? Okay, so we are into week 1, lecture 1, and now we're moving on to part 2. So today we're going to talk about why do we teach entrepreneurship, and why do you guys have to study it? Why do we force you to take the class if you're in management, and why are students even interested in it? Okay, so we are into week 1, lecture 1, and now we're moving on to part 2. So today we're going to talk about why do we teach the entrepreneurs as far as professors go. We've all done it. Some have been successful, some have failed, and the point is we can take our experience and bring it into the classroom to some extent. Okay, so as far as the field of study goes, because the discipline is evolving, it's not theory-driven like some of the other disciplines. That's actually what I like about it. To me, entrepreneurship is not rocket science. It's fun. It is interesting to read. There's tons and tons of examples that you can read, and the cases that you're going to study this semester are just riddled with experience and a lot of insight, which I think helps when you try to think about going into business for yourself. All right, so the thing that that I also think is distinct about entrepreneurship. We have a very uncertain environment because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring when you start a business. It's hard to find your market. It's hard to keep going past 10 years. It's also difficult to get money, especially in today's day. Good luck going to get a bank loan for a business. It's very difficult to do than 20 years ago. To some extent, we're more productive with less thanks to technology that's out there. So we don't need necessarily as much money as we needed 10 years ago to start a computer software company. So 10 years ago, we needed about $1 million, $1.5 million to get our software company up off the ground. Now, you can do the same for $50,000. So technology has really helped us a lot with that. And the nice thing about entrepreneurship is you can teach the skills and you can learn from past mistakes what not to do. And I think that's what makes it fun and unique compared to all other fields, right? Okay, so what can we teach about entrepreneurship? We can teach you to some extent where to go to try to get ideas. So how do you generate ideas? The best way to go and look for ideas is through experience of your own. So if you've tried a product, you hate it, you wish something else was on the market, or there's a gap that you see because you can't find something you want, then maybe the spark will hit and you'll want to go. So Spanx, great idea. I'm going to bring you back to Spanx again. So the lady who created Spanx, she went for a job interview and she was wearing white pants. Now, why would you want to wear white pants? I don't know, but she decided she wanted to. So she didn't like the fact that she had panty lines. And so she looked in the mirror, didn't like how she looked, thought she wasn't professional, and decided to take a pair of pantyhose and chopped off the feet on the pantyhose, pulled the pantyhose on, pulled the pants on, was smooth, and she decided she's going to the interview. Interview didn't go so well. She was driving back home, and she was thinking about her quick fix pantyhose to alleviate her panty lines, and the spark hit. Well, if I'm having this problem, maybe other women are. She is the youngest billionaire today in our country that's a female. Right? So sometimes the opportunities jump out and bite you, literally, and other times it's a matter of searching, seeking them out. So if you look at trends is another thing. We do a lot of trending in entrepreneurship. So what are some trends that are changing, shifting? Natural resources. We're having shortages in the next 30, 40 years, potentially, natural resources. That's why there's a huge push for solar power. Here in Colorado, Fort Collins is one of the, I think they got $250 million from venture capital for a plant that is helping with creating these solar panels that are supposed to be outstanding. I was driving through Amarillo and Abilene, and they have these huge windmills, basically, that are generating a lot of energy, and it is one of the country's foremost regions for wind generation, which I didn't realize as I was driving by. Found that out later. So sometimes you can look at trends. Another trend, a good example, is we have an aging population, right? So our boomers, which are 75 million people, are going into retirement, and they have money to spend, but they're also getting older. So as you get older, you might see more health problems. We're having a lot of medical issues nowadays, especially with costs that Obama has been looking at and other presidents have been looking at. So is there a way that you can capitalize on the fact that we have an aging population that may need help if they get sick? Sure, robotics. Japan's been working on it now for 15 years to try to create a robot that you could pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to live in the house with you to help you get on and off the toilet, put you in the shower so that you don't have to rely on a family member who might have to work, right? We're also seeing robotics in the classrooms where the Japanese market is trying to look at putting robots in the classroom, and they put this fake skin on the robots, and they really creeped out all the kids in kindergarten. It was a little scary, but I think that's the direction that they are maybe trying to go. In the future, I would not be surprised if I'm no longer in the classroom. I'm going to be teaching like this because I think it's the way of the world. We have very fast-paced technology lifestyle, and the cost for education is really high for what the payback is. And so I think that there's been some shifts. So how do you find opportunity? You can look at trends. You can do trending analysis. So that's something we're going to learn in the class. The other thing I tend to focus on is assembling resources. So 20 years ago, to go and get a loan at a bank, much easier. Today, I would wish you good luck. And just because unless you have huge assets to use as collateral, it's very difficult to go to a bank, even with a contract set in place. I've seen this happen many times. With a contract set in place, it is very, very difficult to go and get a loan for your business. Thanks to the recession, thanks to all the stuff that happened in 2008 plus, there's been a lot of people out of business. There's been some pickup on that lately, but it's still not a great place. So what I would, and I tend to teach and focus on more, is don't go to a bank. Don't go and borrow money from grandma. Don't load your credit cards. There's other places that you can go that are better starting points where there's more free money that has potential. I had an example. I had 2 students that went to Kickstarter last semester, and one of them did a beer growler online and basically launched on a Kickstarter, and he made almost $200,000 in 3 weeks. So he was very successful with his company as far as getting funding. And I had another student who launched on Kickstarters and was not as successful. But there are peer-to-peer lending sites, there are crowdfunding sites, there are angel investors. I'm an avid, active angel investor. I've invested in over 100 companies, both in Colorado and outside of Colorado. And there are lots of people that are willing to put money forward to try to get companies up off the ground. And I think that's much better than going to debt and taking a loan if you can even get it. So we'll talk about that. How do you assemble resources? Where do you go to find money? Because without money, it's difficult to get going. Okay, the other thing we'll look at is managing uncertainty. I mean, you have to be comfortable to some extent taking risks. It's just part of the game. You have to be comfortable with failing. The first time I failed, it was not fun. I can laugh about it now. It took me about 10 years to laugh because $50,000 at 19 cost me a lot to pay back. But I learned a lot from that, and I made every mistake in the book, which I've tried not to make, and I try to teach what not to do. But managing uncertainty is hard. But there are certain skills which we're going to talk about in the weeks to come. How to grow your business, how to build the team, understanding what your limitations are as a founder, even as a CEO. So you might be a great chief executive officer, a great president for your business now when there's only 4 of you. But very few people can do what Bill Gates did and what Steve Jobs has done, where they start in the early years and end up with a company that has several thousand people and they're running it and successful. So that's where you as an entrepreneur have to understand your strengths, your weaknesses, what you're good at, and when there's a point where you need to step away because you're actually harming your company more than you're helping. And that's when you would bring in experts, veterans, CEOs, marketers, vice presidents, and of course that comes with a big paycheck, but they typically can help you scale and launch on a level that you realistically probably cannot. Right? Another place for entrepreneurship that we'll talk about is corporate entrepreneurship. So Starbucks is a case that we're going to talk about. They were very entrepreneurial in the early years. They lost their entrepreneurship edge, and then they had to come back and find it. So you can see entrepreneurship not just in startup years, but also in the corporate years where you have, if it's a small business, less than 500 people. If it's a larger enterprise, we're seeing more and more entrepreneurs that are getting recruited and are being pulled into large corporations to try to help them stay innovative. So Ford, General Motors, if you look at all of the big car companies, they lost their entrepreneurship edge. And if you look at all the innovations, most of the innovations that they actually have in their cars today, it has come from small businesses where they've acquired the innovation, pulled it in-house, pulled the entrepreneur in-house, and then they have basically migrated into what they're doing. Right? Okay, and then probably one of the final topics we'll talk about is realizing valuation. How do you put a dollar value on your business? So if you want to exit, so when I wanted to exit and sell my business, my second business, putting a dollar value on it was difficult because you might think it's worth $10 million, but the bank and the appraisers only think, the brokers only think it's worth $2 million. So you have to look at the numbers and how much of a value are you as an entrepreneur or CEO bringing to the table. If you leave, what does that do to the business itself? Any assets you have, any contracts in place, retained earnings. There's so many things that go into it. What does the industry call for as far as valuation? So there are a ton of things that go into putting a price or a value on your venture. And that in and of itself is a science. So we will talk about all that. But the point is, with the field of study and why we teach it, is that all of this can be taught. And what I find is success rates are pretty grim and I'll teach that to you in the next lecture. Those that are successful, I find, are those that are educated, that are, it doesn't have to be formal education, it doesn't have to be college education, but they've gone out and researched, they've read, they basically, even if they haven't written the business plan, they can answer every question that you would need answered that the business plan would answer. So it takes a lot of time, energy, research, and this can all be taught and learned. And it's people who are naive, that they don't think through what they're doing. They don't actually go and talk to their target customers. They jump beforehand, that the failure rates tend to be much higher. Networking, mentoring, really what we've seen in research helps lessen the failure rates across the board. So these skills can be taught. Okay, so, and the final thing I want to talk about as far as entrepreneurship goes and why you guys have to study it is, I promise at some point in your life, right, you will contemplate running and starting a business for yourself. Whether you do or not, and you make the leap or not is another discussion, but you will mull it over at some point. And so and this is usually in your 30s that this will happen, mid-30s to 40s that this will happen. If you've taken classes that give you a good base, there's a starting point, you're much better off than if you know nothing about it. And doing a feasibility study, understanding what the first stepping stones are crucial to try to help you decide whether or not you should pursue the venture or not. Okay. All right, and one thing I wanted to just comment on, entrepreneurship, remember you don't have to have a certain personality type. You're not born to be an entrepreneur. Anybody, anytime can be an entrepreneur. We're seeing more and more kids that are entrepreneurs. So Shark Tank, I tend to watch a lot of Shark Tank in class. It's part of our class requirements. You'll see more and more kids now that are going and starting businesses. I was just watching about I think she was an 11-year-old that created a venture that she made $8 million on selling these little crazy flip-flops that were cute, and she got them into Nordstrom's and all these places. But she literally designed the flip-flops. They're not over the top as far as design or anything like that. They're cute, and yet she was able to go out and start her business and run her business. So you can be an entrepreneur at 9, and you can be an entrepreneur at 90. So we're seeing more and more boomers and traditionalists who have retired and either have run out of money, or they're living longer than they thought, or their kids are having trouble, or their grandkids, and so they're trying to bring money to the table. So you can be anytime, anywhere, an entrepreneur. Okay, so what changes have I seen in entrepreneurship? Globally, there's been a lot of shifts from planned economies, so communists and socialists, to more mixed market, more democratic type of economies, more capitalist systems, more transitioning economies. And because of that, there's been a boom globally in entrepreneurship. So if you look at Africa, Africa has many, many countries that are booming in entrepreneurship. And they're not revolutionary. They're not exploding industry growth. I mean, we're not talking about the next smartphone. We're not talking about the next PC. But we're talking about a fishing pole that a 5-year-old can use to go and fish to get food to put on the table. And he might sell the drawing of how he created a fishing pole with natural resources and sell that for 10 cents. And that makes a difference between surviving as a family or dying. And so we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurship emerging in a lot of countries where there's been huge poverty. We're also seeing a lot of entrepreneurs that are moving into countries that are transitioning. So Russia is a good example. Serbia, which is where my family's from. Croatia has seen some booming in entrepreneurship. Europe in general, even Greece with its economic crisis. Ireland is another good example of where entrepreneurship is starting to move again. And there's some opportunities to make money. And so individuals from our country and other countries might look at other countries and say, okay, well, what do they not have? So an example, Zipcar, which is a case you're going to read, is a car sharing company. #1 car sharing company in the world. We actually didn't invent the idea, okay? The 2 co-founders saw the idea in Berlin, and it was working in Berlin, and they thought, well, we'll just bring it here, right? At the same problem. So that's where you have to look at, can you import the idea? Is it importable? And so this is where you might also see creations that we've done here, and we'll go to other countries that aren't maybe as advanced and create similar businesses. Okay. Remember with entrepreneurship too that it's a driving force behind our economy. There is a series which we're going to watch. It's going to be part of a requirement in this class, The Men Who Built America. It's a History Channel documentary. It's amazing. It's a great series if you haven't watched it. But it really teaches you the foundations of entrepreneurship in our country and where we went in the early years and the ethical dilemmas that came along with entrepreneurship. And one of the reasons why our country is so fixated on entrepreneurship is because our country as a nation was built on it and has been the #1 country in the world economically for long, long periods of time because of entrepreneurs who came and radically changed and revolutionized industries here and abroad. Now, can we hold that forever? If you just look at sheer population size alone, it's going to be unrealistic. So there are other countries. You have China who's coming up. You have India that's coming up strong and furious. You have lots of South American countries that are coming strong, which we are going to have to compete with. And that's why there's such a focus on stay entrepreneurial, go and create ventures. It's not enough to just work for large businesses because the large businesses were not the driving forces in our economy. It's the small ones. And that's one of the big things that we as a nation have to keep pushing forward. Okay, so with that said, if you look at Rockefeller, you look at J.P. Morgan, you look at Carnegie, any entrepreneur, it could be your parents, it could be your grandparents, it could be your friend. Why do people become entrepreneurs? Why do people go and create businesses? Research dictates interest, and I've done many research studies in foreign countries because that's sort of where I tend to focus a lot of my research on global. And I have actually found the same results that a lot of these other studies have found too. The #1 reason why people go into business for themselves, for freedom. And it totally makes sense, right? You can call your shots. You can be your own boss. You can set your own hours. If you like to work from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., you're a night owl, great. If you've got a baby at home, if you've got a sick parent at home, sometimes the only option for you is to have a business so that you can bring in money and take care of other responsibilities that you might have. Also, there is the pursuit of your own dream. That's another reason why people go into business, because you have an idea that you've wanted to pursue. It doesn't really fit into what you're doing, and eventually you just have enough and decide to jump and take a chance, take a risk. Okay. Many people like the thrill of creating something that's theirs, that they can call theirs. So that's another reason why people go into business, because it's creative, it's innovative, it is artistic to some extent, depending on what you're doing, and it gives you momentum towards fulfilling something that is internally yours that no one can take from you. So that's something that people tend to focus on. And last but not least, it's not a huge motivator, but financial gains. Now, I'm not talking about going to business to become a millionaire. 30 years ago or 20 years ago, they used to teach in school that people would go into business so they can make $1 million. That's actually not true. That's actually myth. Most people just want to sustain their lifestyle. So some financial reward. They don't mind working hard, but they hope to gain at least some financial reward, but not necessarily become millionaires. And statistically, it's hard to become a millionaire. But you could probably sustain a lifestyle that's comfortable for you and your family. So again, with financial reward, it can be bittersweet. You can become wildly successful. So if you look at Sir Richard Branson, he owned Virgin Records. He sold Virgin for $1 billion. When he got the check and he sold it, he walked down the street and was crying like a baby. I can remember with my company when I sold it, I had the same elation and depression all in one. It was like I was bipolar to some extent, not sure kind of, if I was going to be on a high or a low. And here's why. When you create something, it's your baby. You spend every minute that you have nurturing and helping that child grow. And then all of a sudden, you sell it. And you're giving your baby to somebody else who may actually destroy it, who may tear it apart, who may take it in a direction that you're not comfortable with. Or best case, they end up keeping it the way that you had created it, but now you're left on your own. And so that's where it's bittersweet. You're happy that you were successful, that you could do what you thought maybe you never even dreamed you could do, but now it's like, oh crap, right? What am I going to do now? Because now you have time that you never had, and you're able to be quiet, which is very uncomfortable. And so that's where the mixed emotions come in. Okay, now, one thing I want to talk about just for a second is oftentimes money is not the motivator for why people go into business. So if you look at Jim Clark as a Silicon Graphics, he helped invest with Mark Andreessen in Netscape. Mark Anderson was young at the time. Jim Clark had sold Silicon Graphics for, I don't know, something of upwards towards $30 million plus. He didn't need money. He was highly successful. Silicon Graphics did 3D type of what we would consider now three-dimensional type of animation and imagery, which was what you tend to see in the movies now. So when he sold Silicon, he was actually quite wealthy. He didn't need money. Mark came in and said, hey, can you give me some money, come in as an investor? And Jim's like, I just got done with my business. I'm pretty wealthy. I don't really need the money. It's high risk. And Mark's like, oh, come on, Netscape is something that I want to do. I think that it could be pretty important. And Jim's like, okay, well, look, I'll give you the money. My only hope is that you make enough money with the business so that I can build myself a custom yacht, sailboat, which is what he tended to love to do. And so he went in it thinking it's going to fail. He didn't think he would get a dime from it. He invested in it, and his little tiny investment was worth over $1 billion. So I think he got a hell of a sailboat out of all that. But the point is, he didn't go into it for money. That was not the primary motivator. He really gave Mark a chance. And he actually didn't think Mark he thought he had a good chance, but it's still high risk. There was a chance that he would succeed, but maybe wouldn't succeed. So when you're an angel or you're an investor, you go into it realizing stats are really against you, that you're going to probably not break even. Okay, if you look at Blake Mycoskie, Blake Mycoskie, who is with Tom's Shoes, he created Tom's Shoes when he went to Argentina. He realized that a lot of the youth didn't have shoes, and because they didn't have shoes, they couldn't go to school. And so that's where the buy one and we will donate another one to a person in need who doesn't have shoes came from. So we're seeing a lot of social entrepreneurship emerge, and we're seeing a lot of for-benefit companies that have just recently emerged as a new classification as of only a couple months ago, actually, where people are going to business because they want to help change some kind of vexing problem. And that has nothing to do with money. And in fact, many of them don't make money. Some do wildly well if it's more of a for-benefit, but if you're a social entrepreneur, you're not in it for the money. It's more nonprofit. So to some extent, right? So that basically, in a nutshell, is why we study entrepreneurship, why we teach it, and what motivates people to go into business for themselves. So number one, freedom. Pursue your own dreams, right? Create something that is valuable to you and you wish to create. And last but not least, to have some kind of financial gain, but it's not to become a millionaire. All right, so that's it. We will move on to the next topics coming shortly. internally yours that no one can take from you. So that's something that people tend to focus on. And last but not least, it's not a huge motivator, but financial gains. Now, I'm not talking about going to business to become a millionaire. 30 years ago or 20 years ago, they used to teach in school that people would go into business so they can make $1 million. That's actually not true. That's actually myth. Most people just want to sustain their lifestyle. So some financial reward. They don't mind working hard, but they hope to gain at least some financial reward, but not necessarily become millionaires. And statistically, it's hard to become a millionaire. But you could probably sustain a lifestyle that's comfortable for you and your family. So again, with financial reward, it can be bittersweet. You can become wildly successful. So if you look at Sir Richard Branson, he owned Virgin Records. He sold Virgin for $1 billion. When he got the check and he sold it, he walked down the street and was crying like a baby. I can remember with my company when I sold it, I had the same elation and depression all in one. It was like I was bipolar to some extent, not sure kind of, if I was going to be on a high or a low. And here's why. When you create something, it's your baby. You spend every minute that you have nurturing and helping that child grow. And then all of a sudden, you sell it. And you're giving your baby to somebody else who may actually destroy it, who may tear it apart, who may take it in a direction that you're not comfortable with. Or best case, they end up keeping it the way that you had created it, but now you're left on your own. And so that's where it's bittersweet. You're happy that you were successful, that you could do what you thought maybe you never even dreamed you could do, but now it's like, oh crap, right? What am I going to do now? Because now you have time that you never had, and you're able to be quiet, which is very uncomfortable. And so that's where the mixed emotions come in. Okay, now, one thing I want to talk about just for a second is oftentimes money is not the motivator for why people go into business. So if you look at Jim Clark as a Silicon Graphics, he helped invest with Mark Anderson in Netscape. Mark Anderson was young at the time. Jim Clark had sold Silicon Graphics for, I don't know, something of upwards towards $30 million plus. He didn't need money. He was highly successful. Silicon Graphics did 3D type of what we would consider now three-dimensional type of animation and imagery, which was what you tend to see in the movies now. So when he sold Silicon, he was actually quite wealthy. He didn't need money. Mark came in and said, hey, can you give me some money, come in as an investor? And Jim's like, I just got done with my business. I'm pretty wealthy. I don't really need the money. It's high risk. And Mark's like, oh, come on, Netscape is something that I want to do. I think that it could be pretty important. And Jim's like, okay, well, look, I'll give you the money. My only hope is that you make enough money with the business so that I can build myself a custom yacht, sailboat, which is what he tended to love to do. And so he went in it thinking it's going to fail. He didn't think he would get a dime from it. He invested in it, and his little tiny investment was worth over $1 billion. So I think he got a hell of a sailboat out of all that. But the point is, he didn't go into it for money. That was not the primary motivator. He really gave Mark a chance. And he actually didn't think Mark he thought he had a good chance, but it's still high risk. There was a chance that he would succeed, but maybe wouldn't succeed. So when you're an angel or you're an investor, you go into it realizing stats are really against you, that you're going to probably not break even. Okay, if you look at Blake Mycoskie, who is with Tom's Shoes. He created Tom's Shoes when he went to Argentina. He realized that a lot of the youth didn't have shoes, and because they didn't have shoes, they couldn't go to school. And so that's where the buy one and we will donate another one to a person in need who doesn't have shoes came from. So we're seeing a lot of social entrepreneurship emerge, and we're seeing a lot of for-benefit companies that have just recently emerged as a new classification as of only a couple months ago, actually, where people are going to business because they want to help change some kind of vexing problem. And that has nothing to do with money. And in fact, many of them don't make money. Some do wildly well if it's more of a for-benefit, but if you're a social entrepreneur, you're not in it for the money. It's more nonprofit. So to some extent, right? So that basically, in a nutshell, is why we study entrepreneurship, why we teach it, and what motivates people to go into business for themselves. So number one, freedom. Pursue your own dreams, right? Create something that is valuable to you and you wish to create. And last but not least, to have some kind of financial gain, but it's not to become a millionaire. All right, so that's it. We will move on to the next topics coming shortly. Okay, so we are week 1, lecture 1, part 3. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about small businesses in the United States and basically give you a very brief overview of the number of small businesses that we have creating annually, or that are being created annually per year. Okay, so every year the Small Business Administration creates a presidential report, and it's available online. It's free. Anyone can access it, and they talk about entrepreneurship and what's happening with the small business climate in America, right? So if you look at, because of the Great Depression, which started, the Great Recession, I didn't mean to say that. That was sort of a hiccup. So the Great Recession of 2008. Because of the Great Recession, like I said earlier, lending practices have really changed for small businesses. And when lending practices change and you can't go get money to start a business, it becomes difficult for many, right? Because if they don't have assets that they could put up against the loan in case they fail, they're not going to be able to get a loan. Okay, so lenders tightened credit terms. They made it much more difficult for many individuals, and most individuals, to get loans. Because of that, other things emerged. So peer-to-peer lending sites, crowdfunding, like Kickstarters is probably one of the most famous ones that you guys probably have heard of, have emerged, where the crowd funds, they basically gift over or give money or loan money, depending on what sites you're on, for startup owners to get up off the ground. Okay, if you look at since 2008 into 2009, lending decreased 15%. Financial company lending decreased 20% across the board. So this caused many small business owners, because they couldn't go and get loans, to go elsewhere. And unfortunately, most people went to credit card debt. I mean, and that's just simply because it's readily available. Right, you have a credit card, you can go charge a couple grand, get up off the ground, try to get running with your business, another credit card will come in, you charge it again, and then before you know it, you're drowning, right? So we're going to talk about funding in a couple of weeks in the future, but the point of the discussion is that lending has really tightened up and it's become very difficult. So if you look at the numbers of across the board, number of businesses that are starting and creating every year annually, they're actually quite high. That doesn't mean that they're successful. It doesn't mean that they actually got to first customer shipment. It doesn't mean that they actually got to market. It just means that somebody somewhere filled out the paperwork and filed it with the Secretary of State, most often, unless there's sole proprietorship, and basically tried to get their business going, or are sitting on it still. Okay, so unincorporated self-employment. If you look at, and again, the numbers from 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, they're all pretty similar. Okay, unincorporated self, meaning that you're probably a sole proprietor, or you're not incorporated, meaning you're not a C Corp or an S Corp or LLC. You would be a sole proprietor or a partnership or a limited partnership, which we're going to talk about later on. We have a little less than 10 million businesses starting annually per year. So 9.8, I'm sorry, million. I don't know if I said billion, but I meant million. 9.8 million businesses that are unincorporated starting annually. Okay, now incorporated, meaning C, S, or LLCs, we're having less than 6 million, so about 5.5 million. So if you add those two together, we have around 15.5 million businesses in the United States starting every year. Now again, that doesn't mean that they're actually successful, doesn't mean that they ever get to first customer shipment, it doesn't mean that they've done a single dollar of sales. It just means they filed the paperwork and have moved forward. Okay, so small businesses, the definition of a small business. When I ask students this, I get all kinds of answers. I have students that say a small business is 10 people or less, 15 people or less, 20 people or less working for the business. That's actually, it is true. Those are actually more micro enterprises, but the actual definition of a small business is 500 employees or less. And 500 to me is pretty dang big. right? But that's a classification. So when you look at Small Business Administration, when they're classifying small businesses, that means that they have 500 employees or less. Now, if you look at that versus large corporations, 99% of all business in the United States are classified as small businesses. There is less than 0.3% that are actually considered large corporations. So in a nutshell, a little less than 20,000 large corporations exist here in the United States. So if you run the statistics when you graduate, if you're in business and management, if you're going to go and work for a business, and even if you're not, if you're going to go and work for someone, statistically speaking, the chances of you actually working for a small business are significantly greater than you working for a large corporation here in the United States today. Okay, small businesses provide 75% of all new jobs to the United States, and they're adding more and more jobs to the United States than large corporations. Okay, half of the private sector's workforce is employed, and actually that's closer towards 70% every year. We're seeing it change and go higher and higher. We have more innovation in small businesses compared to large corporations, so they're able to change quicker. They're able to shift compared to large corporations, and I think simply because there's less people. So you'll have less bureaucracy, less red tape, because if you're running a business that has 50 people, 100 people versus several thousand people, you're going to have more layers with the more number of people, so you can organize and you can regulate and you can be efficient. Okay. So again, small businesses, 99% of the businesses in our country, and again, they are able to change and shift and meet demands based on what customers want because they're smaller and they're able to be more innovative than large businesses. And large businesses tend to buy innovative ideas from the small businesses because it's cheaper for them to do that than to try to create it on their own. And there'll be a case, Vermeer, which will show you that with Microsoft. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about minority small business stats specifically. So if you look at minority-owned businesses, there are 4.1 million firms in the United States that generate almost $700 million in revenue, okay, per year. They have 5 million workers. So 4 million businesses that are minority-owned. They generate almost $700 million in sales, and they have almost 5 million people that they are employing. Workers. Hispanics own 10% of the businesses, of the minority-owned businesses. If you look at, there are almost 800,000 companies in the United States that are located in the poorest regions of the United States. And that would be in the top 100 largest cities in the U.S. Okay, women-owned businesses tend to make a lot of money for our country. We tend to make upwards towards $1 trillion per year in annual revenue, and they employ almost close to 10 million workers, right? So women-owned businesses have really changed a lot, and the space has changed over the past, 20, 30 years. There's been a lot of debates. I was on this PBS sort of discussion panel thing last semester where we were talking about corporate America and the fact that there's not as many CEOs and women that were in the executive C-suites, and why is that? And I basically was representing entrepreneurship, and my thought is, as a woman, to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, right? You're working 100 hours plus per week. You're never home. You travel quite a bit. If I have to weigh that between being at home and running my own business, even though it's smaller, I might want to have a different path than being a CEO of a top company. And so there's been a lot of debates and research as to that. And what we're seeing is that women are opting out of corporate America and opting into entrepreneurship because you have more flexibility, you have more freedom, you can dictate your own schedule, especially if you have children. I have 2 kids. Child rearing is problematic sometimes because they get sick, like in the worst possible times, and so that doesn't necessarily help you if you're needing to go to a meeting in Portland, Oregon, and you have to be there regardless of whether your kid is sick or not. So I think that there's more and more research showing that women are opting out in a way, and they're moving into entrepreneurship, and so we're seeing a lot more women starting ventures, which is a good thing, actually. We're also seeing a lot of immigrants, and we have historically seen immigrants become entrepreneurs, so almost 20% of the startups are coming from immigrants in the United States. And I think we're going to see more and more of that because our population size is changing. We're supposed to be upwards towards 350 million people in America, and that's not from us going and having babies. That's from a lot of immigrants coming into our country. So I think that because we have a lot of freedom and we have opportunities here, people are jumping at that, especially if they come from countries where they've been stifled, and starting a business, whether it's a sausage store or a little kiosk or it's a high-growth computer software engineering company. I think that a lot of the immigrants are grateful for these opportunities, and they're coming and creating ventures because of that. Okay, so unfortunately, when you look at stats for minority-owned businesses tend to close more readily than non-minority-owned. So the failure rates are higher for minority-owned businesses. There's different reasons why. Research will show. Some of them are inconclusive. Women-owned businesses, which I said before, are exploding. We're seeing more and more. We're starting to increase our pace in creating our ventures. So if you look at out of 1,000 women in the U.S., 50 towards 60, some of the newer stats are starting businesses. So if you look at that compared to men, for every 1,000 men, 98 men are starting businesses. For every 1,000 women, we've got 60 women who are starting businesses. So it's not statistically huge, but it's still pretty dang good. And we're seeing more and more of that. If you look at female-owned establishments, we are outpacing male establishments in 40 out of 50 states. So that's a good sign and a healthy sign of the economy. Okay. And so that's sort of where we are as far as small business goes. So almost 16 million per year that are creating unincorporated, incorporated across the board. Minorities-owned businesses are increasing. They tend to fail more often than non-minority-owned. Female-owned businesses are starting to increase. And we're seeing some movement in this space, and that's continuing to increase. And so now I'm going to move forward and talk about other things in the next lecture series. So that's it.
So that was all the videos, all the 3 videos which I have shown was on entrepreneurship development, and it's a very elaborative class. So we are already running out of time now. Class is about to get over. So I think we can stop here. If you have any queries, any questions, just go ahead and ask your questions. Everybody. Lakshmi, Vijesh, Wilfred, Prabha, KP, Kelvin, Sabir, Abdul Salam. Any questions? Anybody wants to ask anything? Prabha is typing something. Okay, Prabha, I'll just hold on. I'm just sending you the link. Just a second, Prabha. I'm just sending you the link.
Okay, so we are week 1, lecture 1, part 3. And so now,
Prabha, I have just shared the link. You can just click on the link. That is part 1 which I have shared. When you click on this link, you will, on the right hand side, you will find other links also. Class 2, class 3, class 4 and so on. Okay? Okay. So thank you all for your time. Hope all of you have enjoyed today's class. And we'll be meeting in the next class with new topic. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.